Hello, everyone. This is Joy Allen. I'm the Customer Success Manager for NetApp. I have with me today Miles Kniep, and he's going to be presenting on optimizing your OCI environment virtualization. So, Miles, I'll let you take it from here.
All right. Thank you very much, and thank you all for joining. So I guess just maybe a brief overview of myself for those of you that don't know me. I've been with NetApp for about 5 years, a couple months in this role as a success manager for the EMEA market. So any of you guys in EMEA may already know who I am. If you are over here and you don't know me, please reach out to me. I'll have my email and contact info at the end of this presentation. Most of this will be demo. I only have a few slides to share with you, so I'd love to get your guys' feedback on chat. If you have questions or want to see something specific maybe while we're discussing. So by all means, feel free to jump in. So looking at specifics, what we'll kind of cover here is how to use OCI as a decision, I guess you could say, facilitator for what to optimize in your environment. And we'll keep this only in the operational dashboard simply because, at least in my opinion, reports are really powerful. But for the people, running the environment on the day-to-day, referencing the report that maybe you need a lot of time to wait to aggregate useful information, it maybe isn't always the best approach. So having a quick dashboard that you can reference on a once-a-week basis or even on a daily basis if you have some particular project going, I think can be pretty powerful. And then we'll talk about a few things on what to look for specifically in these particular use cases and move on to the demo. So as a decision facilitator, I think it's funny, everything's always X as a Y. So looking at some of the objectives I've been hearing from a lot of the customers I deal with is that we've been asked to maximize usage on what we have, but we don't necessarily know where to start with that. Again, looking at the daily hours and minutes. Moving into things like, okay, how do we right size? Actually having the actionable data presented in a format that is quick and easy to act on can also be difficult. So a couple of the questions up here, where do I have underutilized assets? What's the sum impact of those wasted resources? That sort of thing. Those are things that OCI can reveal to you if you're not already aware of it. And if you are, great. I hope to hear your participation during the demo. I guess a question for the room, has anybody heard other things that maybe they'd like to call out that I could try to address during the demo? Maybe just put it in the chat or unmute yourself briefly. If not, does everybody kind of agree that these are common things? If not, I would love to know, because then I can maybe demo a third item or something. I'll give you a moment to type. Solo? I'm kidding. All right, so moving on. Some of the impediments that come with trying to address those things are the fact that you may have multiple physical sites with different hypervisor clusters. So for example, we may have here at NetApp vCenter server or cluster in Amsterdam, another one in Munich, another one in Sunnyvale, several in North Carolina, and the list goes on and on. And then similarly, depending on the different business units, certain hypervisors may be more useful for some groups. So again, in my example here, it's mostly AWS and OpenStack used by a lot of our development teams, but we in standard corporate IT have VMware and Hyper-V because they're really well established. And then maybe there's a separate project that's looking at Azure Compute, that sort of thing. And so with that, you have many different sources. Each one has its own visualization tools. There are various reporting engines, I guess you could say, that you can pull that kind of information out of, but the actual metrics you have to distill down into one central place, and obviously that's where OCI comes into play. So looking at what you already have, since you have OCI in your environment, some of the key things you can do is build a dashboard that helps you holistically identify candidates for optimization. If you've been really rigorous about your annotations and you're flagging to business entities, you should automatically know who the owner of that is. So you can approach and say, hey, is this necessary? If so, great. If not, then you can go back to your show back or chargeback report and say, look, this is the wasted capacity that we need to, you should ideally may take some action on. And with that, ideally, once you have that sort of a view, it's great to set a goal on what level of improvement you would like to see. So in this little example here I have on the left, we see that 55% of the vCPUs in the environment are actually powered off, but they're still allocated. That's a lot of wasted capacity. And while it doesn't impact the host directly, when we start looking at deployments of, dozens, hundreds, thousands of VMs, you could wind up actually hitting scale limits within ESX or whichever hypervisor you choose. And then again, coming back to showback and chargeback, taking it to the next level, you can accurately forecast those costs and demonstrate those to the business. So any questions on, I guess, just the high level before I actually move into a few easy dashboards that you can create and hopefully make some sense of? No? Okay. All right, so let's move into the demo. I guess the first one that we'll look at here is the fact that you may have the challenge of seemingly never-ending data growth, and obviously there are limitations in how much idle storage you really want to leave just floating around there, and also allocate vCPUs, allocate memory, that sort of thing. And then the second one we'll dig into is something more about right-sizing within AWS in terms of persistent instances, at least. So we'll cover these two. These are both, by the way, pulled straight out of the automation store, but I've done a little bit of tweaking just based on the environment I'm using as an example. So we can talk about those tweaks and stuff as we go through it. So here's what we will create. First things first, let's go create a new dashboard. And let's add a widget. We'll just say single value because we want a high level first off. And I'll just say powered down VMs. Go do virtual machines here. And something you'll note here, there's not really a way to just say, I want to count VMs. So an easy way around that, though, is you could say processors, but then what we can do is filter a few things and do a roll up, and then a little bit of math. So we'll do power state, off, suspended, unknown, and actually none. That way, anything that's not on. Then let's do by hypervisor OS. We'll come back to that in a minute because I'll need to make a few filters. But you can see already here, this is just a number of processors. So what we need to do to make some sense of it is do a second value, virtual machine, processors again, same power states. Sum by average instead. And also do hypervisor OS for future use. A divided by B as our calculation. There you go, 343 machines. VMs.
Hey, Miles, are these dashboards available with 731?
You can build a lot of the same things in 731. There are a few widgets that were added in 732, however. So I'm trying to think, the single value widget, for example, might have actually been an addition in 732. But all of the graphs and stuff I'll get to in just a moment, that's all available in 7.3.1, and even some of the 7.2x releases.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So that just gives me a count. Let's do a couple more, just so I have a high level before I start getting into the details. It always helps to set a, I guess you could say, a point of reference, so that once you get into a deep dive within the dashboard, you still know at the high level what you're impacting. So go to power state again. It's a lot of the same sorts of things here. Same for, and we'll add a filter for hypervisor OS. And that's a really big number, so let's divide that by 1024, change that to terabytes. There we go. Maybe I'll put that there. Okay, so coming back to variables, I should probably do a text one. We'll give this a name of hypervisor type. Even though that's not the value in the column that I'll filter, that makes sense to the user. Because if I type in AWS or if I type in VMware, that's what the result they'll get. And another one worth considering here, at least for my virtualized environment, would be data center. Save. And we'll just say this, power down VMs reclaimable. Oop, if I could spell. Let's add a couple more. So understanding vCPU distribution can be pretty useful, which actually we'll get into a few bar charts on that as well. Processor, there it is. And here, what we'll do is, instead of leaving as any, we'll choose hypervisor type. So if I, again, were to type in that variable at the top, AWS or whatever, it would show up. And then here we would go off suspended unknown none. List this.
Hey, Miles, we have another question too.
Yeah, sure.
Prasanna is asking, how is the reclaimable capacity calculated here? If you could please provide some context.
Sure, Prasanna. So really what I'm looking at is if this virtual machine has been powered down for, we'll say, 30 days, which is just a time we could set in the dashboard view, I would consider that reclaimable capacity simply because the VM has been down for that long. So what is the real benefit of that space being consumed, right? So if there's, for example, archive data, that's something else. That's not something tied to the virtual machine, though. Normally, that's a replication done at the storage level or something like that. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Miles.
Okay, cool. Good to hear. Thanks for the questions, by the way. So just doing a little bit of math here, you'll notice I don't have a B in. Getting ahead of myself. Virtual machine again, processors again, similar to what we did earlier. But what we'll do is just say by hypervisor, strictly the filter. And so what this allows us to see is of the powered off vCPUs, what is that in comparison to the total, right? Have that one there. Guess it would help if I gave that a name though. And lastly, let's do the same for memory. This isn't as impactful when you're looking at the big picture, because if the memory is not used, it's just not used. But it still gives you a little bit of context in terms of how things are allocated out in your environment. So we'll just do memory, not memory utilization. Do that on both. Same for power states. Add the hypervisor filter again. And the reason I do this on every single one, which you'll see in a moment, is that that change occurs across the whole page then, not just a few of the widgets. List that as a percent, and we'll do the same thing, A divided by B times 100 to give us a real percentage. Allocated memory. Something like that. Okay, so there's sort of our baseline. Now let's get into something maybe a little more interesting. Actually, let me filter both of those first. And this one as well. So before I go further, let me save that so I don't accidentally delete anything. And let's just type in ESX. And you can immediately see the change. Similarly, if I say Azure, AWS, and I don't have Hyper-V in this one, and there's our grand total. So next, let's just do a chart of total capacity consumed by those machines. We'll say capacity detail. And hypervisor again. Now you'll notice here this is still just one big chart, and so that doesn't really help us. So what you need to make sure to do is remove the roll-up, and we'll say show the top 20, like so. Let's make that a little bit bigger though. I think it would be nice if that was readable. How about there? So now, if I say again ESX, there's my top offenders. AWS, similarly. This is actually a really interesting one because you're paying for this idle capacity in AWS even if you're not paying for the compute, right? So if I'm seeing, 2 terabytes here, well, 2, 4, 6, 8, that's something that might be worth investigating. At the very least, giving that maybe the team operating all of those instances, giving them access to this so they can stay on top of it themselves. The idea would be less work for you, hopefully. And lastly, I think we should probably do just a table widget so we can get some detail on that. Off VM detail. Power state again. And here, let's filter by the data center since we're looking at the individual VMs. And make sure to choose that. And hypervisor again. Need to add some columns though. So let's make sure, what do we have here? Name. Let's look for capacity total. And processors. And memory, probably. And what may help, again, if you've been really good about tagging applications, business entities, would be that sort of thing. So we'll say both of those, because that immediately tells you what that should be used for, at least what it was used for. Oh, there it is. Let's bring that over here. I think we'll actually make this a bit slimmer. A little more room to work with then. And there we go. So again, this gives you a high level, but it allows you to take action on that, right? So let me remove the edit. And so if I say AWS, there's my instances, there's my consumed capacity, plus core allocation and such. ESX similarly as well. And I can see that this one's allocated to this particular app, which is interesting because if memory serves me right, this is actually an app that's flagged as, high priority. So it's really odd for me to see that there are powered down VMs. I would be asking the app owner about that then, which would be these guys. So any additional questions about that one before we get into the more detailed example for AWS? No? Okay. And just quickly, automation store. Just so you guys know, that was a lightly customized version out of this solution pack. And again, really the only additional change I added was the hypervisor filter. I don't think that was in there by default. So moving on to this one, I think this may be a little more interesting for you guys. Let's go create a new dashboard. And similarly, let's look at, what we'll look at here instead of powered on and off, because obviously your instances, if they're powered down, you're not going to be paying for. So what's more important is where are you underutilizing something. So what we'll look at is if something is below, say, 50% at its max CPU usage, it should be considered for dropping down. If, for example, it's 2-core made down to a 1-core instance type, or if it's at an 8, depending, it could be dropped down to a 4 or something like that. And that kind of just allows you to stay on top of costs before you actually have to look at the bill, which I think is, in general, probably a good practice. So EC2 processor count. Virtual machine, processors, since that's what I'm after. So here we'll just put in hypervisor OS Amazon, but we'll add a few other things. Actually, let me leave that as is. I would like to create a few variables first. So text on instance name would be good. Probably another one. These are just annotations. I don't think I want any of those yet. So we'll just say number, and we'll use this one for CPU itself. Another number on IOPS probably. simply because if I see that it has high IOPS but low CPU, I at least know it's being used. I'm not going to be coming to somebody asking them to shut down or asking why they're running it in the first place. Let's do another for AWS region. And one more, probably a number for processor count. So I can make use of that later. Let's do a couple more. Actually, let me edit here, because I'd like to add some of those filters. So by name, that way if I type in our filter the instance name, I'll immediately know how many processors are on that one. And similarly, if we go hypervisor IP, let's tie that to AWS region. So just something to keep in mind, this is the value in OCI since we're distilling a lot of vendor-specific stuff down. But in reality, you're looking at that region. So let's do one for memory allocated as well. And we'll get to the utilization here in a moment. So hypervisor OS, and here we'll say Amazon. Name again. Hypervisor IP, and again back to the variable of the AWS region. And a sum here is just fine as well. I'll move that there. And the other really important one, I think, is probably just allocated capacity. So back to our single value one last time. Capacity total is there by default. We'll just do the instance name again. Same filters again. So there. So this is kind of ugly to me. So I think what we'll do is divide that. Change that to terabytes. Okay, so I think the next thing we should probably look at is just a summarization of CPU utilization by region, so you can quickly define which region you need to drill into for more details. So to do that, I think let's do a stacked area. I think I did a line one on the example, but bottom CPU utilization by region. This will be a fun one, I think. Virtual machine. Utilization total. And we'll need to do some filtering here. Quite a lot, actually. Start with our initial ones that we were already using. And now let's do a few more. That one. And I think what we would want is from a range of utilization as a minimum. But on the flip side, you could also say any region that's underutilized as an average. So you could go either way with it. It just kind of depends what you're trying to view. We'll go with that one for the moment and see if we like it. And then let's do the same for IOPS. And same, we'll say from a minimum. And the other one we'll do is processors. So for example, if I only want to view workloads that have more than 2 cores, as an example. And maybe your priority for that is, the single core workloads aren't really a focus on things you need to worry about in terms of cost. You can see still this is just one though, so let's drill that down by hypervisor IP. And now we have a good summary. You can see EU West 1C, 1B, 1A. Obviously it goes above 100, but I think the stack chart gives you a good example, I guess a better comparative example with them next to each other. However, you'll see here this is based on top 10. So we actually want to show this by bottom. Let's change our sort as well. Probably sort by minimum. Also by minimum of every hour. There we go. And let's make that bigger. Something like that. So I can see some cyclical behavior. Where was this? 1C has more consistent workload, but interestingly, 1B and 1A have quite a lot, and then they drop off, become totally idle. And I think we should probably make a table that gives us more detail on that, specifically the instances within there. I'll say instance performance. Any questions so far? Is this making sense? Anything you'd like to see? Similarly, we'll filter on total ops again and CPU utilization. Probably, greater than or equal to again. And our name and our region and also our processor count. Okay, so that gives us a list, but it doesn't really give a good summary. So we'll say group by hypervisor name. Now we have an expandable list that's a little bit more actionable, but we need to add a few columns to make sense of it. So we'll say utilization total, IOPS total, and just so we can gauge general activity, we'll even say IP throughput. I think that's good. So now, if I were to drill down on 1A, I can immediately see utilization here. And the interesting thing here is I'm in a 3-day range, right? And I see that the average on many of these is 4%. those already are kind of a red flag for me. We should probably look into that. Just realized we can't see that other column too. There we go. So something else to consider before we go down to more of the threshold-based things is going to be also what are major space consumers while also having limited, excuse me, limited utilization. So I think for this, we should probably do just a line chart. And we'll say, say more than 500 gigabytes consumed. Bottom 20 IOPS. We can change that to bottom 10 if it ends up being too noisy, but it's a starting point.
Yeah, Mike, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, so I guess, are you still focusing on powered off VMs? I mean, what is the dashboard based on? Is it based on
No,
VMs?
so this one, instead of powered off, what we're looking for here is, do we see any theme, I guess you could say, of, let me just save this really quick. Any theme of virtual machines that are underutilized in AWS. So the example here, if I sort by least used, these would be concerning to me. If they're only 4% utilized, we should probably consider changing the instance type. And the reason for that is you're paying for it and you're not using it, right? So that's just something to bear in mind. And so coming back to what our finished product should kind of look like. Let me go on here. Let me just give you a quick preview. So here's a good example. Maybe, I guess this is probably a good place to start, right? So this region 1B, I can tell does a lot of nothing for a while, right? So if I type in here 1B, I've now filtered down to that. And I can see quite a few virtual machines that do a lot of nothing, but I might be able to pare this down even further. So let's say averaging utilization less than 25%. I've now pared it down to only 5. You can see there's some activity, but again, look at the, where is it here? So looking at this guy, if it's saying 4.5% and it's going up a little bit, do we really need to have it allocated on the instance type that it currently sits on? And so this is the perfect example, percent CPU utilization versus number of cores. So you can see here, our utilization at our peak only hit 23% for this one here. So that's 1.9, maybe that's a 4-core. No, it looks like it's even a 2-core. Not sure, I might need to check the filter on this, but if I, was that I-9? That guy there. And let me just remove that because maybe I didn't have a filter on that region. There it is. So let's go to this page. I can see here's our average. Memory as well, relatively underused. Let's go CPU. And you can see, look, it barely even passes 10%. And granted, maybe if we go 3 days, that'll change. Nope, does not. So the question then comes up, I don't have to wait for the bill from Amazon to take action on that. I can look at this and say, this should not be allocated to the instance type it is. We should size that down so we're not overpaying for it. Does that make sense? You might be on mute, or they just respond over chat.
Yep, makes sense.
So you said it does or does not?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Okay, cool.
Now, I guess the question is now, once you create these dashboards, right? We can export it to different consoles. Is that right? Like if these are different OCI consoles.
Yeah. So.
Dashboard.
So I wouldn't necessarily export it, so to speak. I want this data viewable for anybody. So what I would do is I would provide the URL out to the team that maybe is the consumer of that service. So maybe that's your own team, but in some customer environments, maybe the sort of tooling or reporting team owns OCI, and then there's maybe a development team that's interacting in AWS. So providing this to them as a, I guess, again, source of truth location can help quite a lot.
Okay, just send them the URL. Okay.
Yeah, because that's something they can bookmark, and then if you even just give them guest access, they can view all of that. And so they know where to take action to avoid their bill going up as well. So IOPS will also say filter there. And that kind of comes back to the point of, you know, when you're looking at the bigger picture of the actual cost, that's where the data warehouse is really powerful, because there is actually on the automation store a report package for cloud analysis that helps you understand cost and how to optimize on that front. I'm looking at this more at the, again, the operational level. How do we avoid even having to get to that point, so to speak? This one will just be Amazon. You'll see I'll still need to do some clarification on this bit because we still only have one chart. But I want to make sure this is pretty usable. So IP should correlate to AWS region, and processors should be anything greater than processor count. Okay. So average, yep, by all. Let's actually do this by name of the instance. We should probably have a legend as well. There's our instance names. But I don't want to see the top, I want to see the bottom. So we'll say the bottom 20. I don't need all those others. So what we're looking at now are the basically large instances that do very little I/O, which then raises the question, is this a workload that really should be dedicated? Or is maybe there's a shared compute resource that could be used for that? Because if you're saying, you know, 3 IOs a second, 15 on this, should it really be its own instance? And again, we'll be able to look at how many cores are allocated as well. Should it really have 8 cores or 16 or whatever it may be? And on the flip side, let's actually move that down. Make these a bit taller. Add another line widget. Let's do the opposite here, almost as a, I guess you could say, a warning area. So you're not targeting the wrong thing. So this will focus on large IOP contributors, so you know that's an active workload. So we'll say CPU utilization greater than that. Filter on name. From that value. And processors again. I don't think we need a roll up. We want to see the instance individually. And this is still really noisy, so let's show the legend. Limit it just to 5. And so the benefit here, after I make this large and readable, save. Those could be smaller, couldn't they? There we go. So now if I were to look at, what was that, 1A again? I filtered to only those, assuming I did that right. IP, yes. 1B. These are the busiest instances, at least with regard to IOPS. And I think maybe 2 more that would be of use here. Would maybe a stacked area on actual utilization as sort of a comparison between them all. So you can see it over time. So I just called this virtual machines. I guess instances is probably the more appropriate term. Greater than a certain percentage of CPU and greater than number of cores. So this is a reverse on the filter. So it kind of shows you, again, you could almost look at the right side, the right panel, what I'm building here, as top consumed, and the left panel as bottom within a certain region or application set, which that's something to keep in mind. You can add other filters too for that. So CPU utilization. Oh, I'm on storage. That would help. Aha. Processors. And I said greater than 4, of course. And I said CPU utilization. We'll actually want to do less than on this one. And IOPS total has a less than. So here we want to see the max though. And we want to make sure to do name, because again, this big chart that just shows everything doesn't really help us. This gives us a better visualization. Granted, it's quite busy at the moment. So then look look at our bottom 10 for, so basically what you're looking at is of the low CPU usage, these are the top 10 most utilized. And let's add a legend. Move that over to the right. So it looks pretty busy at the moment, but again, as soon as we apply a filter, we have a few actionable things to examine. And so if I were to also say things producing more than 25 IOPS and with a core count greater or less than that of 4, I think the last thing probably would be a little bit more table data. Probably looking at, well, maybe we could merge that over there actually. Sorry, I'm thinking. Let's start with it. Why not? Greater than, actually less than 25%. And less than, we'll say 25 IOPS. So 2 25s, other way around over what we were doing. Make sure to add our name filter. Same for region. This, we'll just say a hard number, 25. Processors, though, we will want to allow for our filter. So we'll just say from a certain processor count. And what did I miss? Memory. We'll say that also to 25%. Okay, let's group that by processor, because then we have a view on what has what cores. Probably sort that from top to bottom. That's our most expensive instances at the top then. I think the sum is okay there. I think max would be good on this one though, because then you can see if the peak, something to keep in mind is the filter here is for average. So it allows you to sort of do a sanity check on whether our CPU utilization actually deviated outside of the average, and we can see it really didn't. So these are definitely candidates for resizing. And then memory, no, yeah, utilization. So I can see total, core count, utilization on both ends. And this should be probably average. I guess we could do max as well. You can see what the peak is. Barely hits 20%. Add that there, expand. Clear some of these out so you can see the finished product. And here we go. So I can see an overview. Total processors I have in AWS, memory allocated, storage allocated. That's something to keep in mind, especially taking into account the other dashboard we worked on, because again, that's a lot of storage that potentially could be moved, elsewhere or sized down. Then I have a summary here of the different regions. It just helps us, narrow down, especially in a complex environment where you have a lot of different regions being used, possibly by different groups within your business. Quick summary here: utilization, IOPS, throughput. Honestly, you could probably try and merge this with this one here, but the categorization by processor here, I think, helps you outline what are potentially the highest cost, whereas this is more just a reference summary, I guess you could say. Moving on, we can see the bottom 20 IOP users or instances that are consuming more than 500 gigs of storage space. And then we see our top 5 instances of IOPS, just so we have a sort of a reflection within the region of both. So if I go 1C, I can see these are our top, these are our bottom, side by side. And then moving down to the last 2, just in summary, again, our costliest ones by core. Obviously, you can pull that out of the data warehouse as well. But just at the operational level, you already know that simply by the cores. And then lastly, what's less than X percentage and X number of cores. So if I were to say less than 4, this would filter that down. And then we'll say less than, what was the other I said? Utilization. So we'll say less than 50. And there's 4 that could probably be resized as well. So that's mostly all I had for you guys. Are there any additional questions or comments? Was this helpful? Anything you'd like to maybe see in the future? You can, of course, email me, but feel free to bring it up now as well. No? Okay. So just in closing, top recommendations from me, definitely keep an eye on the automation store. I brought this up in the past as well, but there's new stuff going up there all the time. So the last session I gave on this, actually, I had talked about how there was a VMware admin, a NetApp admin, a storage admin solution pack. And this very same day I gave the presentation, there were like 4 new ones added. So I went to show, and we had AWS, we had Azure. I think there's a fiber channel one now as well, and maybe one other. Definitely also check out the cloud analysis and virtual machine analysis report packs if you have the data warehouse. And if you have questions or would like a community to interact with to get advice and input, definitely contribute on the NAP community page. Just make sure you go to the OnCommand Storage Management Software Discussions space and click follow. You can also filter by the tag insight, so you don't have the noise of workflow automation unified manager. So in summary, my, top recommendations would be, before you go into making the dashboards, define the scope of what you're trying to achieve, and then focus on what fundamental information you need to make an informed decision. And so in this example, for the AWS right sizing, what I really need to know is, are we consuming all of the cores we have? If we're not, why haven't we downsized? Or for the other one, if we've been down, powered down VM for 30 days, do we really need to keep that? If it's a template, that's fine, but if it's not, it should probably, the data that's important on there should be moved, and it should be, taken away. And then, of course, when actually building the dashboard, try and focus on the environmental information you need to make that decision. I don't recommend adding lots of charts to make it look pretty. A few that help you make the decision is all you want to do. And then make sure you send the link for that out to whatever team can make use of it. That's the top recommendation I would have out of all of this, though, is that once it's done, make sure people know about it. because, you know, it doesn't really help if it's been created and people are still trying to manually dig into individual virtual machines, or they're not even using OCI because they're completely and blissfully unaware of the benefits they could be pulling out of it. And lastly, if you would like to contact me, here's my information, simply miles.kniep@netapp.com. I'm based in Amsterdam, so I have a little bit of a time difference for some of you guys. For those of you joining from Europe, though, feel free to contact me any time of day. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Miles. Another great session. I always learn a lot when I'm listening to you. We're going to keep the chat open for a little bit. You can take yourself off mute if you have any last-minute questions, but it is 10 o'clock Eastern, so we are going to close it down soon. So just let us know if you have any further questions, and have a great rest of your day.